Mr. Reitinger. Is there a second? Thank you, Ms. Layton. Ms. Goodell, if you would call the roll, please.
Yes. Mr. Anderson.
Yes.
Mr. Castillo.
Aye.
Ms. Gill. Ms. Litton. Mr. Reitinger.
Yes.
Ms. Russell. Yes. And Mr. Webb.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we'll move on to the spotlight for this evening, bullying prevention. Dr. Moon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, members of the board and members of the public, staff. Good evening. This evening we have a special spotlight on learning about bullying and bullying prevention. As you may recall, at the last meeting, you all adopted a resolution signifying that we were all in support of anti-bullying. And this evening we have Lori Prather from TJ Elementary and Matt Sowers from Mary Ellen Henderson Middle School here, who are, I think, featured in this video this evening, and also will be available to answer any questions that you might have following the spotlight. So with that, we'll let John lead off with our spotlight.
If I was trying to make a new friend, I would first of all go up, introduce myself, then I'd ask them what they like, then we'd also talk a little. I'd invite them to my lunch table. We would also at recess we'd play.
So I'm Carol Seaver, one of the school counselors at TJ. Our first lessons this month we're kind of combining Red Ribbon Week and how to be upstanders, how to deal with situations where you are a bystander. Red Ribbon Week is a week that it's supposed to be anti-drug and helping students and children decide not to later on in life partake in, smoking cigarettes or doing, things that, drugs that would be unhealthy.
So as part of that program, we're going into the classrooms and we're going to have each child think about a way that they can help take steps to be an upstander. So they're each going to fill out a little footprint and have a certain idea on there, and those are going to be put throughout the school year, coming to a globe at the front of the school, so that we as a whole school are thinking together about how we are going to take steps to create a much better environment for all of us.
I think if you want to reach out to somebody sitting alone, you can invite them to your group or ask them hey, do you want to sit with us? Or if they're feeling sad, you can be ask them what's wrong, if you can help.
New this year, we have what we call our ATL class, our Approaches to Learning, in the 6th grade, where the counselors are part of a team of teachers that are going through teaching different topics to include empathy, problem solving, teamwork, how to work together, conflict resolution, a lot of things that are really important for our students to learn, and we're really looking forward to that. For the month of October, our focus is Unity Day. It is a day to demonstrate the work together against bullying and that we are united for kindness, acceptance, and inclusion of all students.
We just visited with the PE department, where we did visitations with our class visits. And we delivered information to students, kind of highlighting the correct terminology and understanding definitions. So then when students are actually reporting bullying and harassment, we're trying to figure out, is it a student that's being mean? Is it a student that's actually teasing? Or is it targeted behavior? It's there's a pattern that's happening over time.
I think that just even the simplest actions can help make people feel more accepted in a new school. I've been a new student a lot, being in the Foreign Service, and even just someone smiling at you or talking to you can make you feel so much better.
Thank you for that. As definitely very important kind of area, and hearing that our kids kind of get it and kind of what they should be doing to help avoiding bullying and how to include people from different areas and those who are kind of to themselves, but including them in many ways. I think that's a really good thing. But I'll turn it over to you all if you all have any comments before I ask the board if they have any questions or anything for you.
Sure. So again, my name is Matt Sowers, middle school counselor. On behalf of the middle school counselors, thanks for letting us come in. Alyssa Jacobson, the director, asked me to make sure that we're talking about the ATLs, which we highlighted on the video there. We're starting an advisory program, which we've never had before. It's a monthly meeting. What we're trying to do is develop relationships with the students, doing team building activity, getting to know their advisors, the teachers that they have very well, so that if something is occurring at the school, we're not immune school. But when things do arrive, that they report them, we can address them in a timely manner and move past those uncomfortable situations.
And in the elementary school, we're really focusing a lot on what does it mean. In this video, we talked about being an upstander. What does it mean to, when you see something happening, what can you do? And it's important that we talk about different options, because not every child's going to feel comfortable confronting someone who is, for example, teasing another student. And so another option would be to tell an adult, or just stand with that child, or invite that child to come away from that situation and play, or just in some way show support. So there was a lot of focus on that, and then we sort of branched off into this school-wide idea where we're using the PYP language of taking steps to create a better and more peaceful world. And those steps are related to being an upstander, but also just simple things like the young lady said at the end, smile, say hi, include others, be a friend. So just things that are truly applicable for our younger students and something they can do. And the idea was, what can you commit to doing? And they write it on this footstep, and then come to TJ. At some point by the end of the month, you will see all along the baseboards leading to this global map of how we're taking steps for that. So, and it's in all classrooms, and all staff members are doing it. So we're all aware of it.
It's your speaker.
I read recently that the biggest fear of parents is their children will be bullied. And I was wondering, what do you hear from parents about this, and how do you communicate with parents about these issues?
So I feel that question often. The one thing that I wrote a note before coming in is for us to seek active relationships with parents. Oftentimes, parents in the community will learn about something that's occurring. They'll report it to school officials, but they do not want their children to know that they are self-reporting. So we want when a report is being addressed at home, make it a partnership with the student as a family. Then when we start investigating and working with the student, it's not a complete surprise. We want to make sure to break down the barriers or the obstacles where when students come to us, they feel comfortable enough and that it's a trusting partnership for us to investigate and to make sure that if bullying is occurring, that we've removed that and that it does not return.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's important to remember is what is bullying by definition. And I know you were talking about clarifying that, I saw on that exercise. And it's hard, because any activity that is unkind is not something that we're going to tolerate, so to speak, but it doesn't necessarily rise to the level of bullying. So sometimes it is an educational thing too. Is this really targeted behavior? Is it repetitive? Is it something that, has that imbalance of power, which is what we teach the kids, is the definition of bullying. But at the same time, if your child is unhappy and they're coming home saying someone's being mean to me, it doesn't mean we don't pay attention to that as well. So it's kind of a process of educating everyone, and then also knowing what can I do in that, and being comfortable reporting. And we kind of move into that idea of what's reporting and what's tattling, right, when something happens. Unfortunately, a lot of times with bullying, it can involve your best friends, and so that's really hard, and we talk about that too.
Thank you. Any other Mr. Anderson?
Yeah, thanks. I'm kind of curious about how do you deal with the differences in teaching the kids about bullying and sort of spotting behaviors that might be like that in TJ, where we've got one classroom teacher working with the kid pretty much all day, one student all day, but then you go to Henderson and they're seeing multiple teachers, and how do you deal with the differences there?
Well, I mean, while yes, they're all in one classroom, there's a lot of other time, like during your encore time and during recess and during lunch. And quite honestly, you'll see a lot of that. It happens during the unstructured time. And we talk about the difference between what's considered relational bullying and the more obvious physical bullying, and how to be able, as a friend, the teachers aren't always going to catch that subtle exclusion type of stuff, or the things that are said, you know, in line. And so being able to report that as a young person takes some courage to do, but that's what we encourage them to do. So even though they're changing classes in middle school, it doesn't necessarily mean it's easy to catch in elementary school too.
I'd probably comment more on the systems approach. We are so fortunate. We were just talking about the smallness of our school system. And when moving, especially in the middle school, because you're the bridge between both buildings, right? We go down, we meet with TJ counselors. We try to get to know the students before they enter our building. We try to learn about which students work best with others to try to come up with their schedules. The way that our system works, we've got, and I can't comment on TJ, but I know we have a counseling department weekly meeting. We have an administrative weekly meeting. We have team level weekly meetings, and all the counselors are part of that. Other counselors that we look at our middle school, it's kind of like it's the heart of the school. We want to know anything and everything about every individual student. And probably the thing that's the best is that right now, the way that the structure is set up, we have about one counselor for the most part per grade level in the middle school. And we do have two counselors with the sixth grade currently right now that share a caseload, but we move up with the students. So we get to know the families, we get to know the students very, very well. So this year I'm the 8th grade counselor, and this will be my 3rd year with that group of students.
And it's similar at TJ. Obviously, it's my first year at TJ, but we're moving with the students. So Carol, my counterpart, is now in 2nd and 3rd grade, but she will move up with them, as will Ivan move down and move with the others. So, and we do have regular meetings as well. And so she and I cover 2 grade levels, but we're also very much involved with other members who are working, you know, like our admin team and our behavior specialist team and our, what we call the mental health team of our social work and psychologists too. So just, yeah, having a pulse on what's happening with the kids and really just building relationships.
Thank you very much. Ms. Linton?
I'm just curious if you could, you know, kind of what do you see as the biggest challenge? Do we really have serious bullying challenges, or is it more kids being inclusive? Would you say there's any certain areas that you would say, oh, in this school, this is really kind of the problem I see?
I mean, I'm a month in, so
Okay.
I have to say, I mean, honestly, I see more things about kids being anxious than I do about bullying, so to speak, or at least a lot of words like anxiety put out there by the parent community or kids in general. I mean, so far, I haven't had any big issues, but, you know.
All right, I'll give more of the historical
Yeah.
approach.
So-
So I would say through all my years working in the middle school, and that's been my entire career, I would say it's probably on the social end of it. Probably more about social isolation or exclusion. So I would say students, they come in, it's those unstructured times, right? So they come into the lunchroom, they have they don't have assigned seats, and they get to choose, but you only have 8 seats for all your friends to sit at, right? Maybe one student does not get a chance to sit at that one table, or maybe they were purposely not able to sit at that table on that particular day. We have to try to figure out, was it a student that was being mean that day? Was it just that they were the last student there because they were working with the teacher? Like, that's part of the investigation piece. But I would say it's probably more on the social. When we did all of our investigation and our presentations with the PE department, we told them, you know, for all new families that are coming in, we're very, very fortunate in our small school system. We don't have the physical bullying that you would hear, like the pushing, the shoving. Fortunately, most of the times, the bullying that does occur, we're able to address it because it is social, and most of the time it's a miscommunication.
Dr. Nanda?
I just wanted to say thank you to both of our outstanding counselors, and also hope that you heard in their presentation things like relationship building, getting to know kids, knowing families. And again, it's another unique aspect, as was mentioned here in the City of Falls Church, and how we really do get to know our families in incredible ways. And something else to consider too is that all of our teachers have gone through the Safe Schools training here in the City of Falls Church, which is an online training. So all of our teachers have had training on anti-bullying and harassment as well. So they've got some sense of what to look for when students are engaged negatively, perhaps. But these folks really serve as the experts and go-to. So if there's someone who has a follow-up question, they can certainly ask them. One other piece that I wanted to highlight that wasn't in the video tonight, but we did talk about it last year, was the friendship bench. I mentioned it as something that I had seen in another school, and there's at Mount Daniel, there's a friendship bench. So students, and Jed Jackson, who's the school counselor there, has talked with many of the kids that if you get out on the playground and you don't have somebody to play with, you can sit on the friendship bench and then somebody will come by and pick you up and you can go play. So it's a really nice way to sort of self-identify somebody who, as somebody who's looking for some friends out on the playground. Because I love the very first part of this video, the kid talking about how do I make friends. I would go up to them and ask them what do they like, and it was really a great sort of entree into social skills. So thank you both for your incredible work on behalf of our kids.
Thank you all very much. All right, next we're going to move on to recognitions and reports, and we have 2 recognitions for tonight of the VSBA Media Honor Roll recognition, and I will read the certificates once because they both say the same thing, and just mention both names who will be recognized tonight, and then I will meet you all or a group picture somewhere over in that area there. But the Virginia School Board Association's Media Honor Roll Program honoring Matt Delaney and Nicholas Benton. The Falls Church City School Board recognizes your fair and balanced reporting on school division and educational related topics. Your work has aided the community in focusing on the goals of providing the best public schools we can for the children who attend them. All right, so thank you all very much for what you do, and I will meet you both down here. John will do the photo, and if you all have any comments that you want to make, you can join us right here, or we'll stick it over there either way. Okay. Dr. Boone, if you would join me. So the whole board? How do you want to try to? I just need this. Out of the dark. Come into the light. Come on, we can.
Yes, okay, yes, absolutely. Thanks for asking. Where do you want us to both sides?
That's perfect. Actually worked well. Okay. This way, please. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. And 1 through there. There we go.
My intrepid reporter here gets included in this. Very worthwhile, apropos.
Yes, it is. Once in a while, we have to miss pictures. Right?
Thanks, folks. See you.
Thank you.
We want to see this.
Next is public comment. In accordance with School Board Bylaws 2.30, the time for each speaker is limited to 3 minutes. Additional written statements may be submitted to the clerk for dissemination to the board members and for the record, the dissemination of requests. We have one speaker tonight, and that is Mr. Nick Benton.
Okay. Thank you very much. And thank you again for this honor for myself and for my staff member, Matt, who's doing a great job. I'm here to speak more or less as a proxy representative of you, Fall Church School Board, and the Fall Church School System participating in the CAPES program, which, if you're familiar with it, is one of the most outstanding programs that covers the entire DC metro area for theater arts. And I've been involved in it for years. One of the features of it is that students sign up to be critics of the plays that are put on. And I guess this year we're doing a musical this fall. What's it? Chicago. Chicago. Yeah, it'll be fantastic. So I've made it my business to request and get copies of and publish for all the high schools that are in this area the CAPES reviews that are done for the school plays. And it's a great honor for me, and they've reciprocated by inviting me to come and make a presentation of one of the award winners at the annual gala, where the nominees, it's just like Academy Awards for area-wide theater arts. And it's a most incredible event. I know Lawrence has been up on that stage with me more than once. And, it really is one of the most inspiring things you'll want to see, because they also do production numbers, right? They'll select a dozen or 15 of the outstanding scenes from plays, and they get the students up there and they actually reproduce those scenes on the stage, and it's always terrific. I mean, I see a lot of theater, and I see a lot of theater that doesn't measure up to what these kids do. It's really great. And of course, George Mason High School's production of Spamalot this last year was nominated for at least a half a dozen CAPES, and the student entire production company was up on the stage doing one of the more rousing scenes from that play, last May. They didn't have the pool to dive into or out of, but it's just truly inspirational. So it's in that stance, from that standpoint, that I feel it's important for me to make the case for the need for a fly loft and system in the new theater at the high school, as along the lines of what we have now and have had for years. The fly loft system was used in Spamalot. It's been used in almost all the big production plays. It's been around since the Renaissance, when they discovered how to use pulleys and Archimedean ways to move stuff around. It's just a way of getting sets on and off the stage, and it's very, very helpful. It means you can lift props up above the stage, out of the sight of the audience if you need to. It's a great space saver and all of that kind of stuff, and it's used everywhere. Now, my understanding is that it's not being included in this new high school, and I think that's a terrible thing, because it is in the high school that we have now, and everybody that I've talked to is totally unaware that what we're building as a $120 million high school is going to have less, not more, than what we have in our current high school. And people have come to me with arguments. Well, the High School Education Association won't insure a fly loft system. Well, I mean, how do they get insurance coverage for the football team? I mean, the chance of injury, when you compare it, there's never been an injury that anybody's ever reported at the George Mason High School Theater for their use of the fly loft system. So I'd like to know, really, what is the liability from the insurer's standpoint of having a fly loft system with the record of 0 incidents in the last 50 years compared to tackle football every year, okay? one of the concerns that I have. There's the other one is that I've heard arguments on back, well, you can do great productions without one, without a doubt. And there are some that have great productions are done without fly-offs, okay? Right over here at Creative Cauldron, for example. That's called a black box theater. Well, what you're gonna have at Mason in the new high school, if nothing changes, is you're gonna have just a bigger black box kind of situation. You're gonna have all kinds of problems with where you're gonna put stuff, where you're gonna store stuff. You can't lift it up out of the public's view. And it just really, really restricts the capabilities of what you want to do. Now, if you wanted to do a production of Spider-Man at George Mason High School, you'd need a fly-loft system to do it, to have them swing around. Just saying, if that's what you wanted to have. And I think it's important.
Mr. Brandon, if you could go ahead and wrap up. If you could start wrapping up, please.
I will get everything off. Okay. I just want to read the one thing. I don't know if you ever saw my editorial this week, but what I usually read to these students is a quote from E.M. Forster that he wrote it on the eve of World War II as a democratic opposition to aristocracy. Forster wrote that he put his hope not in an aristocracy of power, but of the sensitive, considerate, and the plucky. Its members, he wrote, are to be found in all nations and classes, throughout all the ages. There is a secret understanding between them when they meet. They represent the true human tradition, the one permanent victory of our queer race over cruelty and chaos. This was on the eve of World War II, which I think we lost about 40 million people. All right? So I tell these students in that auditorium, I read this to them, and I said, this is why you're the hope. I hope you will reconsider, and do the right thing about our theater program. Not see it as a second shift or something that's being done to save space so that we can have all the athletic facilities that all the athletic boosters are asking for. Thank you. I apologize.
Thank you very much, Mr. Benton. Are there any additional public comments? All right. If not, if someone would read us into close, please.
Mr. Chair, pursuant to the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, I move that the board convene a closed meeting for the following purpose: to discuss or consider the identified subject matter. Personnel under section 2.2-377A1, in particular, staff appointments, staff reassignments, staff resignations, staff retirements, staff performance, staff change in position, child care leave, long-term medical leave, leave of absence, and advisory committee appointments, and real property under section 2.2-377A3, in particular, acquisition of real property for a public purpose where discussion in an open meeting would adversely affect the bargaining position or negotiation strategy.
Thank you, Ms. Gill. Is there a second? Thank you, Ms. Russell. Ms. Goodell?
Yes, Mr. Anderson?
Yes.
Ms. Gill? Yes. Ms. Litton? Yes. Mr. Reitman?
Yes.
Ms. Russell? Yes. And Mr. White?
Yes.
Thank you.
Be back. Someone moves to reconvene?
So moved.
Thank you. Second? Thank you, Ms. Russell. All in favor, aye? Aye. Opposed? All right, and if someone would certify the closed meeting.
Whereas the Falls Church City Public School Board has convened a closed meeting on this date pursuant to an affirmative recorded vote and in accordance with the provisions of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, and whereas Section 2.2-3711B of the Code of Virginia requires a certification by this school board that such closed meeting was conducted in conformity with Virginia law. Now therefore be it resolved that the Falls Church Public School Board hereby certifies that to the best of each member's knowledge, one, only public business matters lawfully exempted from the open meeting requirement by Virginia law were discussed in the closed meeting to which this certification applies, and two, only such public business matters as were identified in the motion convening the closed meeting were heard, discussed, or considered.
Thank you, Ms. Russell. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Ms. Goodell?
Mr. Anderson?
Yes.
Mr. Castillo? Ms. Gill? Ms. Litton? Mr. Reitinger?
Yes.
Ms. Russell?
Yes.
Mr. Webb?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I will ask unanimous consent that the consent agenda be approved without objection, so we'll order. And we'll move on to business actions and information, the triennial plan update. Dr. Noonan.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening again, everyone. Tonight, we have prepared for you an update to our work plan, our work plan and triennial plan for 2018 through 2020. And the reason that it's a two-year plan is because we've gone through 1 year of this triennial plan. So we are going to continue to update this until we get to 2020. There are a couple of things just for context that I think are important, and then I'm going to turn it over to Lisa High and Kristen Michael to share with you the work that's been done on the triennial plan. First and foremost, as we developed the placemat that everybody I think is familiar with at this point, we recognized that there were some misalignments from the placemat to the triennial plan insofar as the top line sort of big goals in the placemat are sort of newly formed that came out of the work of the triennial plan last year. So in this triennial plan, what we've done, or what they have done, is they have developed goal alignment so that when you look at the triennial or at the placemat, it will align perfectly to the triennial plan. Additionally, in the work that they've done, they've now added a couple of different columns to the chart. I'm not going to tell them everything, I promise. They've added a couple of new columns to the chart that update the color coding system that we shared last year of red, yellow, and green, and given an updated version. And then the last thing that they've done is they have added an evidence of progress column for September of 2018. So you can kind of see with each priority and strategy, what have we been doing to meet the needs of those top level goals. So with that, I'm going to actually turn it over to Kristen Michael and Lisa High and they will walk you through the revised triennial plan. Last piece before I let them sort of take over is tonight is an information, not an action item. So our hope is that as you hear and have a chance to sort of read through this over the next couple of weeks, the next time you'll see this will be in the November meeting, and at that point we'll ask you for approval of the triennial plan.
So thank you so much for the opportunity this evening to present an update on the triennial plan. Tonight, Lisa and I are going to share this opportunity to provide you information about the process that we use to update this plan, its alignment with our placemat, and then we're going to go through and we're going to highlight items from the triennial plan as examples to show you the changes that we've made. So in terms of the process, throughout this last school year, the triennial plan was discussed during our administrative and teacher meetings. As the year progressed, we really transitioned from having discussions about what the action steps should be to monitoring our progress towards those actions. Then this fall, we got together with a group of leaders, principals, assistant principals, and directors from all of our schools and departments to review the triennial plan and also to assess the progress that we made on each action to date. Any changes that group recommended to the plan itself, we highlighted in blue. So when we get to the page that shows item 1.3.3, one of the things that you'll see is the group recommended that we include other staff, other than our principals, provide meaningful feedback to staff. So previously it just indicated principals did that, but we've added some additional staff members there. So any of the changes to the original plan are highlighted in blue. And then just as Dr. Noonan indicated, the last column on the right includes the progress that we've made to date. So the other item that we changed is we had a color-coded status bar on our plan before indicating what our status was using red, yellow, and green. And we've added a second year to that. So you can see what color it was or what action when we reported out last year. And then we updated to show this current report. So do we think we're green, yellow, or still in the red zone as we work towards completing these for 2020?
And so as you look at the alignment with the placement, all of our priorities and strategies in the triennial plan align to the components of the placement. The first page of the work plan for the triennial plan 2018-2020 includes priorities and strategies that support all of our goals. For each priority, we've included the primary goal from the instructional placement. It should be noted that there are lots of goals that, as you go through the priorities, that overlap some of the goals. So the 3 goals that we'll be focusing on tonight are deploy best practices for teaching, learning, and operations, close the achievement gap with an emphasis on special populations, ensure operational efficiency and effectiveness. This placement continues to bring clarity around the work that we do as a learning organization and aligns us pre-K-12 with a common language. So we'll start first with our priority 1, student-centered teaching and learning, and the goal that match are actually both the deploy best practices for teaching and learning and close the achievement gap with an emphasis on special populations. So the strategy that we will share with you tonight is strategy 1.1. Ensure equity of access to quality core instructional programs and resources for all students. We really make sure that our student learning is personalized. We're addressing both the academic and social emotional learning needs of our students. And sub-strategy 1.2.2, follow principles and practices for the International Baccalaureate program. We have all of our schools who are focusing on how we connect the IB principles into our curriculum and student learning experiences. Specifically at George Mason, we have embedded the IB theory of knowledge is integrated into our curriculum. And at Henderson, which you heard earlier tonight, 6th grade students are enrolled in Approaches to Learning course to enhance their skills for the ATLs. The learner profile traits and the Approaches to Learning have been crosswalked with all of our curriculum IB planners. And students are able to practice all of these skills throughout their project-based learning that are offered by their teachers. And our students are showcasing some of that work through the 5th grade exhibition. This year will be the first year that we'll do a community project at our 8th grade. So that will be an inaugural year at Henderson. And then personal project will continue in its 2nd year at 10th grade. And for this particular action step, we've grown, but we're still making progress there. So we've left that as a yellow rating. The next step strategy we will highlight is strategy 1.4. Make instructional programming decisions by measuring the performance of all students, including special populations, to ensure all students meet and exceed local, state, and federal accountability standards. And this really focuses on closing the achievement gap. And 1.4.1, develop school-based action plans to promote student growth. That was one of our strategies for this year. Each school is in the process of developing a school plan that is done through a collaborative team, which involves principals, it involves counselors, teacher leaders in the building, and then they're sharing it out to the entire faculty. The school goals are being aligned to our division goals. Schools are using student data to develop those goals, which include strategies, who's responsible for making sure that the strategies are followed, timelines for completion, and then how are we assessing our improvement. And for this action plan, again, we're making progress, and we moved that from a red rating to a yellow rating. So we feel like we're in the right, going the right direction in that.
So up on the screen, as Lisa was just talking about 1.4.1, right above that is that item 1.3.3 that I highlighted in our process, where I talked about when we made a change to the triennial plan, we've included that text in blue. So that's the exact spot where you can see that we added other instructional leaders in the building. So when you look at each of these areas in the triennial plan, I think it's important to note that all of the items really overlap with support and instruction on all of them. So we really think about this very first area, student-centered teaching and learning, is really being an instructional element, but it also has support components as well. So I'm going to focus just for a minute on the progress that we've made on 1.1.1, provide all students with access to knowledge, books, food, and resources as needed. So to ensure that we have equity of access to quality core instruction for all of our programs and resources for students, we provide students with access to technology. At the high school level, students are issued a MacBook that they take home at night. At the middle school level, they're issued a MacBook that stays at school. And then at the elementary level, we give them technology for use in the classroom. Where we provide equitable access for all students is for students who don't have internet at home, we issue them a MiFi or a personal hotspot that they can use. So we're ensuring that equity of access. In addition, for this item, social workers reach out to families to ensure that they're provided with the resources that they need. Included in that is support from food service. So as you guys well know, we have a backpack program where we send food home for students on weekends and over holidays. That program is really a collaboration of our social workers, our psychologists, food services, and even the Education Foundation who helps over gaps. So that's some of the progress that we made on 1.1.1, and that remains green. Next, I just want to briefly talk about 1.2.1, which is fully fund the IB program. To ensure that students develop critical thinking and creative problem-solving skills through the International Baccalaureate program. In the budget for this current school year, we fully funded the IB program. So this year, the MYP coordinator position went from 10 to 11 months. And then at Mount Daniel and Thomas Jefferson, they now share a full-time PYP coordinator. So prior to that, if you remember, the PYP coordinator duties were shared by the assistant principals. So on this item, this is one where we moved from yellow to green as we made that investment to fully fund our IB program. I'm going to keep moving and move into priority 2, which is excellent staff. This ties to that placemat goal of deploying best practices for teaching and learning. So in item 2.1.2, which was interview, hire, and process candidates through HR as soon as positions become available. So to attract, hire, train, and retain exceptional diverse staff to meet the needs of all students, we used an early contract process this year to hire candidates that we met at job fairs and also to hire candidates for special education. We know that that's an area that's typically hard to fill. In addition to that, our HR director this year created a shared Google Doc where she posted the status of every candidate as they were working through the hiring process. So principals could look and see exactly where that candidate was at. And then she sent out weekly summaries to principals to really help speed up our hiring process. Then lastly, to make us even more flexible, in addition to everyone else here who's trained to fingerprint staff, our HR director also became trained. So really giving us the ability to try to get people on board as soon as we can. So for this action step, we feel like we were making good progress, so we've moved from a yellow to green for this year. In item 2.1.4, that was attract a diverse staff to reflect the composition of our student body. You can see that 2.1.4 is red. So when we look at 2.1.4, again, as I just mentioned, we went to that career fair at the University of Virginia this year, and we hired 70 new employees. But we still have work to do to get our hires to match the ethnic compositions of our staff to match the the ethnicity of our students. So when we look at that for this year, we're still measuring that data. We have all of the data for the people that we've hired this year as well as our students. So we'll continue to monitor that. But this is a good example of a goal in our 3-year triennial plan where we still have significant work to do as we work to complete this plan. And it is still me. The next item I'm going to focus on is 2.3.2. This item was adjust salaries to be competitive with neighboring jurisdictions. So when we look at that, FCCPS's salaries remain regionally competitive. To do that, we provided staff this year with a 3% cost of living adjustment, also known as a COLA. By providing a COLA, what it did is it increased our salary scales as a whole by 3%. So that very positively helps us in terms of how we compare with surrounding jurisdictions. So while in FY19 we were able to provide a COLA, we didn't provide a step to our employees. Step increases recognize employees' length of service with FCCPS, right? And what it does is with each year of experience, it moves them to the next step on the salary scale. So providing step increases is important as we look at recognizing our current employees for their length of service. But because this item is measuring our competitiveness with surrounding jurisdictions, which we did achieve with the 3% COLA this year, this item is moving to a green rating.
And as we continue to focus on deploying best practice for teaching and learning, we look at making sure that we have ongoing quality professional development, which was our strategy 2.2. And so in highlighting 2.21 and 2.22, we created a K-12 professional learning committee. It was formed this spring to focus on a professional learning plan. This plan includes stakeholder responsibilities, expectations, and advantages for professional learning. We also are working to put together a calendar that shows all the times that we're offering professional development, whether it's in-house, job embedded, or external, providing opportunities for professional learning. And the committee is highlighting what's the data and research behind why we should have ongoing and job embedded professional learning. Our collaborative teams meet weekly to discuss data and to look at strategies to enhance our instructional practices to meet the needs of all of our students. For this action plan, we've made great progress and are still refining the strategy, resulting in continuing with the yellow rating. Moving on to priority 3, optimal facilities and learning environment. The goal that we focus on here is deploy best practices for teaching and learning and operations. With strategy 3.1.3, complete yearly mandatory training for all staff to maintain a safe and secure facilities. We've used Safe Schools to track the completion of staff training for the opening of the school year. Safe Schools provides a platform for viewing videos, either created by others or by FCCPS. It also includes our employee handbook to make sure that if there are policies or procedures that staff have questions about, they can refer to it right there. But we've asked that staff complete this by the end of September for the most of those. And for this action step, we're meeting the goal, resulting in moving from a yellow rating to a green rating.
So 3.2.1 was upgrade all facilities to meet the needs of students in our community. So to educate students in an innovative, energy efficient, healthy, and sustainable facility that supports best practices for teaching and learning, we're completing the renovation at Mont Daniel Elementary School, and we're in the process of designing and building a new high school. So for this item, we're working on both of these projects, resulting in that yellow rating. So I'm going to move us into fiscal management, which was priority 4. This ties to our primary goal alignment, ensure operational efficiency and effectiveness. So I'm going to focus on 4.2.2, provide budget engagement opportunities for various constituents and stakeholders to promote an understanding of and influence on the budget. So to ensure that all stakeholders have a role in developing the annual budget, this last year we held meetings throughout the budget development process with school-affiliated organizations, PTAs, sponsored community meetings, and the superintendent also met with all of our employee associations. In combination with the city manager this year, we held monthly Sunday series meetings. Those meetings focused on the development of the new high school and the economic development site, but they also focused on the budget during budget season, giving the community yet another opportunity to provide us with feedback on the budget. For this opportunity, we're still meeting the goal, so we're moving from a yellow to a green rating. The next thing I wanted to focus on was 4.3.2, provide quarterly budget updates on the expenses compared to the current fiscal year budget to all stakeholders. So to maximize resources entrusted to FCCPS, remaining accountable and transparent with the community, we're providing the school board with monthly budget reports. So beginning this last spring, we presented a monthly budget report that showed both the summary and detail levels of revenues and expenditures. In addition, at year end, we presented a budget report for all of our school board funds that looked at our actual expenditures as compared to budget, and it included the impact to fund balance. So for this action step, we're meeting the goal, resulting in a green rating.
And now for our last priority, priority 5, community engagement. Our primary goal is to deploy best practices for teaching, learning, and operations. In strategy 5.1, encourage and support opportunities for parent and citizen involvement. In 5.1.1, we host quarterly community engagement events with families and community members, which are aligned to our district priorities. Our principals each month are having parent meetings, either through the parent coffees or through the chalk chats, to provide information to our parents around school programming and also to address any questions or concerns that parents may have. We've also put Parent University and have given it a broader presence on our FCCPS website to encourage more parents to become more engaged in the school community and to share the events that are taking place to support our families and students. We've increased outreach with our L families through the meet and greets that have been held throughout the spring at all 5 of our buildings. One larger undertaking that we've taken this spring is to focus on a family resource center. And in this particular place, on the placemat, really looking at the caring community and climate. in collaboration with George Mason University, professor and students from the Human Development and Family Science course. We've worked to gather feedback from families within the community, the school staff, general government staff to gain information in order to provide resources and supports that are needed for our Family Resource Center. An FRC, or Family Resource Center Board, was developed that includes both school staff and community members. They met throughout the summer, and as a result of their work, we're ready to make available a Family Resource Center. We've designated a couple of locations at Thomas Jefferson Elementary School to house the staff member and some resources for our families. Our parent liaison her time has been increased to full-time to support the Family Resource Center as well. And plans are underway to increase the parent engagement and provide school-based community resource services to our families. We've made great progress in encouraging and supporting parent and citizen involvement. Although we've made great gains, we still have work to continue to do so. Therefore, we're going to leave that remain as a green.
And I have
as a yellow, I'm sorry.
I have the very last example to highlight tonight. 5.2.2, establish a process for collaboration between the general government and school staff. So to collaborate with City Council, the Planning Commission, and school stakeholders, staff, parents, and other community members around FCCPS's policies and activities, we took multiple steps this past year to increase our collaboration with the general government. We held a joint discussion with school and public safety leaders. We also held a Sunday series with the city manager, and we've been jointly participating on the infrastructure committee in support of the new high school and the economic development site. For this action step, we're working on the goal, and I'm super excited about all the things we're doing in collaboration with the general government this year, but the remaining rating remains yellow as we continue to work towards doing this even more. So thank you for the opportunity to present the updates on the triennial plan.
Thank you all very much. Are there any questions from Ms. High or Ms. Michael? Ms. Russell?
1.1.5. So I see that's a green, but it talks about planning for community project pilot for the 8th grade. So I guess I just wasn't clear if, since it's in process, would it still, I guess, what denotes like how it is green?
Well, with our IB program, that's one of the places that they want us to make sure that we have the exhibition at 5th grade, community project at 8th grade, and then the personal project at 10th grade. And so now that we are in the process of having all of those areas, we felt that we've met the expectation for what IB has requested, and we feel like the work that our students are doing moved us to a green. So it's just really that we've got plans for all of those things are in place now. And the students are engaged in learning what their community project, and it's more of a group project this year, not individual like the exhibition and personal project.
Other questions? If not, thank you all very much. We will move on next to adoption of superintendent's goals. Dr. Noonan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Ms. Michael and Ms. High, for rolling through the triennial plan. And again, we do want to offer the opportunity to provide us some feedback over the next several weeks. So if you have some questions or want to ask us anything, please don't hesitate to do that. Each year, the superintendent is required to bring you some goals. And so this year, I've updated my division-wide focus goals to align with the FCCPS placemat and then also bring alignment to the triennial plan. So in the past year, we had pretty good alignment, but I'm hoping that this is even more clear so that you can see that our work from the superintendent's level to the triennial plan, down to the placemat, down to the classroom, and up to the school board are all sort of in direct alignment. So you can see from top to bottom, bottom to top. So the first goal that and the way that I've structured these, just by the way, is there's sort of a top level goal, and then there are some sub goals or some work or action steps that are associated with them. And the first goes to the International Baccalaureate program and becoming the premier International Baccalaureate school division in the country. And here I do mention by 2020 is a consolidation of learning. Each students in grades 1, 5, 8, 10, and 12 will utilize their developmental approaches to learning skills to showcase their knowledge as measured by a student-motivated project. We are continuing to work through those. As Ms. High indicated, we do have them in place, but we're continuing to refine them as we move along. And so by 2020, we are confident that we'll have some we already have some really powerful projects in place, but they will continue to get better. And one of the ways that we can enhance or support that work is by June of this year, the end of this year, using common age-appropriate rubrics to provide students in all of our grades explicit feedback on how they're working within those approaches to learning. And those, again, are how do you research effectively, how do you think effectively, how do you engage in good self-management, communication, and collaboration. And then also by 2019, June this coming year, utilizing inquiry-based teaching and learning strategies to promote and instill creativity, curiosity, problem-solving, and self-agency needed to participate in these showcases of learning within the IB program. These, again, are hallmarks of what really strong IB programs have. However, the June 2020 top-level rubric that has the approaches to learning piece in there is not currently created. So we're in the process of creating something so that we can monitor student progress within those ATLs over time. On the right-hand side of the division-wide focus, you'll see evidence of effectiveness, and these are actions and activities that myself and the staff will go through to help us meet that 2020 goal as well as the 2019 goals on the left-hand side. So that first one is about IB. The second one is about best practices for teaching, learning, and operations. And here again, you'll see the language alignment. This is an instructional goal. And here by 2020, all of our schools will have a clear definition and support around high-quality classroom instruction for all students. In other words, Tier 1, I think I've talked to everybody here before about the difference between Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 instruction, and a structured and timely identification process for students at risk of failing or in need of targeted intervention, extension, or enrichment. And those are two additional pieces that I've added this year as part of Tier 1, making sure that we're also providing extension and enrichment opportunities for students that are being successful to go into more depth and complexity within the curriculum. The sub-goals associated within those are by June of 2019, each schools will collaboratively implement teacher resources clearly articulating Tier 1 literacy instruction. So we have a literacy specialist in each of our buildings that are working with our teachers to talk about what does high quality literacy instruction look like in every classroom. And likewise, by June of 2019, each school will collaboratively implement teacher resources clearly articulating Tier 1 mathematics instruction. And we have math resource folks in each of our buildings, which is really important this year because it is a math adoption year, and we are working through some new processes around high quality Tier 1 math instruction. Again, on the right-hand side, you'll see how we're engaging our CTLs, our reading specialists, our professional learning teams in this work, and also looking at the instructional framework, which Ms. High has shared previously in other meetings. The third is specifically around special populations. And here the top level goal is actually a 2019 goal. And it's September 2019, each school will create a school action plan based on student data that supports the SMART goals to close the achievement gap as measured by SOL performance. One of our big challenges in this division, and I'm sorry, it should actually say, I'd like to change the date on that because we're doing those action plans right now. So I'm going to actually back up and maybe change that date to December of 2018. So if you want to, we can strike through that and make that change. So by December of 2018, all schools will create that action plan. So as Ms. High indicated, our schools are coming together and they're really looking at these three goals around IB, around deploying best practices, and about closing the gap and developing structures and strategies to meet those needs at the school level. That was not something we did last year or previously. So we really are asking our principals and our lead staff members to engage in a process that really focuses, again, from all levels, from bottom up and top down, ways in which we can support teaching and learning in our pre-K-12 environment. So to meet that need, we also have that each school will create that school plan based on current data to improve those outcomes for students with disabilities, students who are English language learners, and students who are in poverty. And in the electronic version, there was a template that was created that simply lines out at the top level which goal you're working on. So if it's closing the gap, what are those action steps and strategies that you're going to deploy? Who's going to be responsible for making that happen? And then what is one of your evidence of effectiveness, and how are you monitoring progress towards that goal? In other words, you can't just put the goal in place and start working on the actions and then come back 6 months later and say, well, let's see how we did. I think it's got to be much more refined than that. Just like formative assessment with students, we need to determine whether or not we're being successful in time. So if we have to make a course correction, we can do that potentially. The evidence of effectiveness is that there would be a 10% combined reduction of the achievement gap between students with disabilities, students that are English language learners, and students who are living in poverty from their non-impacted peers in the spring 2019 reading and math SOL tests in grades 3 and end of course. So here we are actually quantifying some student achievement data and looking at that 10% reduction. So as you'll recall, at the last meeting, we were able to share some of the data out there. So we can pull that back now and begin to really look at, with a critical eye, where are our greatest needs and who are the students that need the most support. And looking at it through that data-driven lens will allow us to really hone in and think about timely, tailored intervention by name and by need. Some other pieces that you'll see in here down the left-hand side of the second to last page, I think are important also because they really speak to how we're utilizing resources and leveraging those resources that you all as a school board helped us bring to bear at the beginning of this year. So in 2019, all collaborative teams will have an opportunity to meet, not an opportunity, they'll participate in professional learning with our special education coordinator, Seamus O'Connor, who is our new special ed coordinator, and implement instructional strategies and research-based models for effective collaborative teaching with specialized instruction. So when we really think about how are we going to close the gap between special needs students and our non-disabled peers, we really need to focus in and have somebody who's expert in that area working with our team. So in conjunction with Seamus, we also have really outstanding special ed teachers in our buildings that are working with all of our teachers to look at how do we differentiate instruction, how do we scaffold instruction to meet the variety of needs of the students that we have. The next is around LEAP, and these are our ESOL students. So by 2019, all collaborative teaching teams will participate in professional learning with our LEAP coordinator, and that's Jennifer Santiago. She is new this year as well, and she's been working with our teams on implementing research-based models for effective English language learning. And she's done an outstanding job, just like Seamus has, getting into classrooms, talking with teachers, working with both LEAP teachers and general ed teachers on best practice strategies for working with ELs. And then the last is our MTSS coordinator, Julie Macrina, who is new to the school system this year. And she is going to be working with all of our collaborative teams on MTSS implementation strategies for instruction, specifically around research models for effective instruction for intervention, extension, and enrichment as well. And Julie has already done a tremendous job building and enhancing those relationships with teacher teams on our campuses. So the focus of those three, you might remember in the spring of last year, I called them the triad, right? So the triad is out in the field working with teams of teachers to enhance instructional practice and think about how do we provide really strong, high quality intervention, instruction, and assessment for our kids. And so they've been working with their specific folks throughout the year so far, and they're looking at expanding their influence across the division throughout the year. And then the last is around operations. And again, by June of 2020, operational processes and systems will be aligned to support our triennial plan with 100% fidelity and show growth over baseline and systems efficiency and effectiveness measures. You might remember last year when we got into this particular operational goal, I wouldn't say we had a bandwidth issue for us, but there were a couple of folks that really wanted to dig in. And so food service and transportation really dug into their national standards and started to look at national benchmarks that they can baseline off of. And so this year they will develop those baselines, and we will ask budget, finance, facilities, communication, community outreach, and division council to find national benchmarks also that they can next year benchmark off of. So this year is going to be an identification process of what are the best practices, and next year will be a baseline benchmarking year, just like transportation and food services will be going through this year. So that by 2020, all of our operational units, if you will have really strong baseline data that they can benchmark from, so that we can then begin to develop those strategic, measurable, attainable, results-oriented, time-bound goals to help those operations get better and better over time with respect and in relation to what their benchmarks are. And then in 2019, 2020, we'll begin reporting out annually of those metrics around effectiveness and efficiency. So my hope in here is you'll see a couple of things. One is there's a really strong focus on instruction, and a strong focus on meeting the needs of all of our students in a timely and tailored way, utilizing and leveraging the resources that we have that are available to us. We are a small but mighty shop here in central office, and bringing in 3 recognized experts in special ed, English language learning, and multi-tiered systems of support really has afforded us an opportunity to deploy those very best resources into our schools. So when I think about closing those achievement gaps, I see us making some significant inroads this year, because we will also be deploying those instructional best practices that come from the work of the teams and also the work of those experts, which then just lends itself to developing all of this work within the framework of international baccalaureate programs. And so we continue to look at ways in which we can identify like districts to us that we can collaborate with, and we've had some conversation with those folks already. The last part of this, again, is the operational piece. Certainly don't want to lose focus on the operating side of the house. Really important that we have strong efficiencies. We're able to deliver the food, deliver the kids, and deliver the mail on time. And so we look forward to doing that as well. So that back side of the house kind of keeps the front side moving. So with that, Mr. Chair and members of the board, those are the focus areas which I'd like to spend some time working on this year and report back to you at the end of the year about progress.
Thank you, Dr. Nene. Any board members have any questions they have? Mr. Reitinger?
I need a second to frame the thoughts.
Thank you.
I got you.
Thank you, Dr. Noonan. I like the way the goals go. I think the continued revision is helpful. I actually, for once, don't have any sort of line in, line out suggestions, but just a question about the future, which is, I think these goals admirably, move us farther towards the placemat vision of the world, if you will. And I love the idea of having a single page that sort of describes everything we do. I'm sort of wondering what these goals, if we think a year or two out, what they look like if they're fully aligned with the placemat. And there's a little bit of a crosswalk, because the mission statement talks about being the best international baccalaureate program in the nation, but the main goals are, of course, student-centered teaching and learning, close achievement gaps, and operational effectiveness, which are means to get to that. And I'm sort of thinking about what the school system's goals would be, and what your goals would be, in the next year and the year after that. As we say, these are the 3 big things we're working on. Do you even mention the International Baccalaureate Program in your goals? You see how I'm struggling with how the alignment takes place most effectively.
Yeah, and it's a really good point. And it's one where I think there's a struggle for us, because the International Baccalaureate really isn't a thing, it's more of a philosophy. And so trying to develop a goal around a philosophy is oftentimes very hard. So I think what I see happening with those 3 strategic goals that will help us become the best system we can be is that the system is rooted in the elements of the International Baccalaureate Program. So if we have the highest performing students in the United States and they're in the International Baccalaureate Program, that then tells us a couple of things, because highest performing, when you look at data alone, means things like SOL scores, AP, IB scores, but it really doesn't speak to critical thinking, problem solving, creativity, some of the elements that the International Baccalaureate program is asking us for. So I think where our 2.0 gets to is really trying to take a dive into what do these projects look like in the International Baccalaureate program, and how do we put those out there as outstanding measures of excellence, not necessarily in comparison to ourselves, but just as standalone projects. Look at what our kids are doing. I don't know if that is responsive or not, but I think the next frontier for us, after we kind of bring up all of our students and close those gaps, is to really take that next step into IB and let that program kind of stand on its own, and highlight some of the projects that are part of that.
So I think that's all fair. I like structures, and it sort of feels to me like a nice way to align everything would be to start with, as you've done here in a sense. I mean, you've got two goals under the first priority, one goal under the second, and one goal under the third. But if we think about having essentially one superintendent's goal, or with maybe several sub-goals for each of those three pieces. Just leave International Baccalaureate aside for a second. And then sort of at the bottom, because obviously those are three pieces that all go to the mission of being the primary International Baccalaureate program in the nation. So once we've looked at those three things, the things that you and the school system are going to be working on, what are we missing there? What is there something in the profile of an IB graduate, if you will, that we're striving for that's not covered by those three? That we, it may not align perfectly with those three main goals in the placement, because you always lose things when you reason upward. But there may be some ideas, and maybe that's an empty space. But I'd strive, if we're going to have three main goals for the school system, to have three main goals for the superintendent, with maybe sort of an overarching one, which I like at the bottom, but could be at the top, that sort of, captures things that are not, if there is anything, that are not covered by those three pieces. But I thought this was a very good document.
Okay, thank you for the feedback. Appreciate that.
Mr. Anderson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dr. Nuno, I'd like to echo a lot of what my colleague was just saying, and I really did like this document, and I like the structure of it overall. So my questions are actually a little bit more sort of on the evidence of effectiveness. I'm trying to understand what this just sort of means in practice. In particular, sort of the thing, there's repeated mention in here of formal and informal observation for various things, and what does that look like? And I'm pure curiosity on my part to understand it more than anything else.
Yeah, so very specifically, in the first one, formal and informal observation data collected and feedback given on inquiry-based teaching and learning strategies, as well as student agency, independence, motivation, self-directed learning. So today, just as an example, I did learning walks at Mary Ellen Henderson, and I did a learning walk at Thomas Jefferson, and I got to 5 different classrooms in each of those buildings, 3 at Henderson, 5 at TJ. And when we walked into the classroom, it was myself and Dr. Dippold at Henderson and Mr. Carey at TJ. I said, look, what are we looking for? What's the identification of best practice? And so we talked about what we would be looking for before we went into the classroom. And in each of those conversations, we talked about, okay, so if we're looking for engagement, and we're looking for student-centered work, and we're looking for authentic products, now let's talk about what does that look like in the context of IB. And so we talked about the ATLs, and we said, how do the ATLs connect with these products or engagement and the like? And so these informal observation walks that I did, I looked for very specific things that were associated with the International Baccalaureate program. Are there anchor charts on the wall that talk about the ATLs? Is it clear to students what the learner profile looks like in the classroom? So So is I guess, sort of those kinds of informal things are what I'm looking for. I think where it becomes more formalized is working with the principals in their action plans that they're working with at their school level, is as they're doing their more formal walkthroughs of teachers, they're going to be looking for some of those traits of IB. And if they see them, they're going to note them, and if they don't, they're going to note that as well as part of the teacher evaluation process.
Okay, and so then I guess my question was, you pretty much got to it at the end, there is sort of how that informal, I understand the formal process, but how the informal feedback gets into the teaching development, into the professional development with the staff, and into the planning for the school itself, the individual school.
Sure, so that is incumbent upon myself and Lisa and some of the other folks that have a broader view of what's happening in the school. And we work with the principal and we say, here are some of the things that we're seeing. Can you talk to us about how this particular piece of the IB program is being infused into your school programming? Because we've been to 10 classrooms and we haven't seen it. Do you need some support on that? How can we help? What can we do and provide? And so then we come back. But what really is nice about this is that, and it was mentioned by Kristen, is that at TJ and Mount Daniel, for example, they now have someone full-time or half-time each that are working with the IB program, and they're also in classrooms working with teachers. So they're getting some informal feedback. They're providing some informal feedback as well.
And then the next step from the placemat is when you look at the FCCPS instructional framework, and you see student-centered learning environment, high leverage instructional practices, monitor and assess, collaboration, professional learning. So the next step is for us to take and create an instructional framework that talks about these domains. And we're putting in strategies like student engagement. And we're showing teachers what questions do you ask to answer, are your students engaged? And then we're also providing resources for what that will look like. So that we'll send that out to teachers and continue to build on with our specialists throughout the school year. So hopefully, if we're seeing things as we're walking through classrooms, we'll add that to our instructional framework under the strategies and domains and give resources so teachers can pull up and see exactly what we're looking for. That's the next step.
And Mr. Chair, if I can just follow with one then on the operational goal question. I'm interested in how you see the last line in it triggered the thought in general, identifying a work session in the spring when report out on progress can be done. I'm just wondering if that's something that you've given any thought to, those sorts of report outs at each stage of that operational goal. So as you've figured out what the benchmarking should be for each of the areas, kind of coming back to us and talking to us about that. And then when the benchmarking has been translated into goals, then you're starting to do progress towards the specific SMART goals, coming back and talking to us about that. And the reason I say that is, if the third line is supposed to be completed by June of 2020, coming to the spring of 2020 with sort of an update on goals might be just a little bit late for there to be, if there's any suggestions or things that come about in the preparation for a presentation like that that are sort of helping for getting closer to achieving the goals. So I'm just sort of wondering about a framework for reporting out.
Yeah, why don't we go back and take a look at that?
Okay.
Because there may be some other ways through a Friday update or the like where we could share some information about how it's coming along.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Hey, Mr. Castillo?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to pile on a little bit here, I think I would challenge you. You start out with an instructional goal for IB as the first goal, but I guess I would challenge you to push IB into the other goals as well. Because I think if you took that one away and you look through the rest of the goals, I'm not sure how much the IB would emerge. And this could look like a superintendent's plan at most any division. And I'm not saying that as a critical thing, but I think it's really going to be hard to kind of push to emulsify IB into the regular curriculum. And I think that's got to be something that, for example, with student-teacher teaching and learning, I think there's more of that IB philosophy that you could drive into that. I had a question on the special populations. the goal is a 10% combined reduction of the achievement gap between students in 3 categories. So what does that mean? Does that mean 3 1/3% across each of those ones total, or 10% in each one? How does that number get put together?
I think it's.
And why did you come up with 10%?
Yeah, I thought that 10% was it was strategic, in that we have 40, like in one particular subgroup, we have 40% to go to get to, or 30% to get to 90%. So over the next 3 years, if it was a 10% reduction from one year to the next, that would get us there. I think I'd like to maybe rework this a little bit and maybe be more clear about by category, because we have further to go in some than others. So maybe taking a more refined look as opposed to a 10% combined reduction, because I think what I was thinking at the time was taking the total population of those 3, special ed, students with disabilities, students in poverty, and ELL, combining their pass rates, and then looking at the majority pass rate and seeing a reduction up, if you will. So if you're at a combined total of 53% in the aggregate, you'd get to 63% in the aggregate. It'd be a 10% reduction that way. The problem with this potentially could be is if your majority population drops, and you only have to go 8% to get to that. So it's maybe not as significant as you want it to be. So I'm hearing a lot of feedback tonight that I think maybe if it's okay, I'd like to take another shot at these, to be honest, to maybe kind of clean them up a little bit. But I welcome the feedback.
Yeah, and I guess I would just ask a question. In terms of the degree of difficulty of those 3 categories, which is the hardest? And does that make a difference in this?
That's a really hard question to answer. And the reason that it's hard to answer is because we don't know who we're getting from year to year. So, for example, and we know that our EL population is fairly transient, and if we have a new group of students who come in who are WIDA level 1 or WIDA level 2 students, and they're replacing L students who are WIDA level 3 or WIDA level 4, or even 5 or 6, then we have a whole different population that has to grow more than the last population that was there. So that's one thing. If our students with disabilities go out and we have a pretty high flying kid that's fairly successful, moderately disabled, and that student is gone, and another student comes in and they've got some pretty significant issues, then we've got further to go. So I don't know if there's one that's harder than another, and that's what's, I think, in some ways unique to us, is that we get to know these kids individually, and so we should be able to, in many ways, get to their needs in a way that's different than other school districts. So my hope is that regardless of who we get, we can make gains with them.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to get that churn factor cleared up, because in part it's unfair to measuring how the division's doing if it's apples and oranges. And it's potentially unfair to the students as well, because they're not being measured in their own right. They're compared to people who may not even be there anymore. So.
Good point. I want to just comment. I don't want to give the impression that we're not doing a lot with the IB program. And I'm looking out in the audience, I see Mr. Kelly out there, and I've been to a couple of, not necessarily to English or History 8 team meetings, but I've been to a lot of team meetings where their unit planning is all rooted in the IB planners. And so our teachers are coming in and they're developing their curriculum and instruction within the framework of IB. So I'm sort of, the infusion of IB into all of this is hard in some ways because we are already sort of doing a lot of it. So trying to call out, and maybe part of it is talking about what we're already doing might be helpful. So I'm not being very clear, but I guess one of the things that I just want to make sure you're left with tonight is that a lot of the work that our teachers are doing in their collaborative teams is really rooted in the development of curriculum and instruction within the IB framework. They're talking about developing strategies for assessment, utilizing IB rubrics, and then ultimately getting to a conversion chart so you can, figure out what a grade is on a standard grading versus a numeric grading system. So I'm hearing what you're saying, and I'm trying to figure out how to navigate that.
Yeah, but I mean, for example, on that particular sub-goal, there, maybe you can find a way to introduce an IB-esque metric to it as opposed to just SOL and supplement it. So it doesn't have to be an either or. But I think one of the problems, the challenges with IB is I remember this quote about the case study at Harvard Business School, what we teach is how we teach. And that's kind of IB as well. And so how do you measure the how?
Good point.
Are there any other questions? So, do you want to proceed with adoption, or do you want to, you kind of gave an indication that you...
I'd like to rework these if I can a little bit based on some of the feedback that I've received. If that's acceptable to the board.
I'm just going to say if that's fine. Yep, that's fine. If that's, you want to do that and bring it back.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll do that. And if you have feedback between now and the next meeting, let me know. Any more feedback between now and the next meeting, let me know. And then I won't stop doing this work, though, between now and when we meet next.
All right, thank you, Dr. Noonan.
Sure.
And I actually had a question, but couldn't think when Ms. Michael and Ms. High were doing their presentation, and it came to while we were sitting here. And it was in regards to the hiring of that diversity piece within hiring. Where are some of the places, and have you all reached out to some of, in particular, HBCUs and to have schools of education with teachers? Have you all kind of reached out with any of those schools here in Virginia or within just the general DMV area for recruitment purposes at all?
So I would say this is one of the areas where we still have opportunities to really increase our trying to hire more diverse candidates, right? We haven't yet reached out to historically Black colleges and universities, but that's certainly a great idea. I also know this is something that other jurisdictions around us are focusing on as well. So I think bringing it up at our Region 4 meeting to get other people's thoughts in terms of what they've done, what's worked. I know one of the things that's also critical is getting people to reach out to where they went to school, right? So trying to find contacts within those universities as well who know Falls Church City Public Schools and can really speak to our strengths and why we're such a great place to work. So we definitely have work to do in that area.
Okay, thanks. And even though I have changed jobs, but within former institution, I will reach out to them and just kind of see what their process is and who could be a potential contact for you all to maybe reach out to and see how that can potentially work into a partnership of talking with prospective students there and even looking at ways of partnering to have student teachers that may be able to come over and get a window into a, in my opinion, I'm a little biased, but a fairly competitive school system that could be very good for some of those students who may have that interest in doing it. Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to GMHS design updates. Dr. Noonan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick update in terms of community outreach. We continue to hold our meetings with Gilbane, Stantec, Quinn Evans. We continue to verify and validate program with teachers and continue to make decisions within the schematic design about adjacencies of classrooms and size and space. At one point, we had talked about having our final schematic design, or SDs, at the Sunday series on October 21st. However, that Sunday series, October 21st, is going to be another opportunity for community outreach and not the final schematic designs. We will bring the final schematic designs for the community at our November Sunday series, which is going to be November 18th. So we have 2 more opportunities for outreach with the community about the new high school. There has been a lot of conversation in the community about a couple of things. The first is the fly loft, and we did have someone speak tonight about that, and I just want to quickly indicate that, as was noted, we are on a very tight space that's vertical, and for us to do a double height fly with a 24-foot proscenium would mean that we would need 48 feet on the back of the auditorium to go up for a fly, and that would dig into that next level up and begin to compromise in some ways our classroom space above. So that's one concern that we have. Another concern that we have that was indicated also was that the Virginia's Department of Education has indicated that fly lofts are dangerous, and they do not recommend that we build them. A third is that Virginia Municipal League, our insurer, has indicated to us that they would prefer us not to build one as well. I have spoken with Gilbane. Loudoun County is no longer building schools with flies. Arlington is no longer building school with flies, and Fairfax is no longer building schools with flies. I think the biggest issue, as was indicated today, was that we are losing something. And I think anytime you lose something that you had, it's hard. But I don't want anyone in this room to think for a second that we're not gaining something as well. And we are gaining an incredible theater, an incredible school. So the school that we're going to build in the big picture is going to be way better than what we have. The last thing I'll say really about it, 2 last things I'll say about it is I am somewhat disappointed that unfortunately it's been framed as an athletics versus arts conversation. I want to remind everybody that the athletic field, one of the athletics field is being taken for the addition. So what we're building is a new field to take the place of the one that was lost with the new building. And so we are not adding any athletic space. We're not touching the stadium field. That's not being updated at all. The baseball field is not being updated at all. All we're adding is a practice field. And then we are going to look at other solutions that I have had a number of conversations with Sean Northrup about, who, by the way, said we shouldn't be engaging in 2-dimensional theater anymore anyway. We should be looking at 3D sets. And while he was disappointed for a day, he said he was over it and ready to move on, and really believes that we can have an outstanding theater program at George Mason High School without a fly. And brought to my attention, it was brought to my attention also that Hamilton, the #1 Broadway musical in the history of Broadway, was done without a fly. And there was an awful lot of 3-dimensional set work there. But the idea of not being able to provide or produce something spectacular without a fly just is not true. So we are going to look at technological solutions. We're going to look at modified rigging up on top that would allow rolled sets to be able to come down. I never mentioned anything about slip sets, which are side-to-side sets. I don't know where that information came from, but and we can look at a variety of different options, but we aren't going to have the double height proscenium just because of the space in the school. And the other piece is we are looking for a way to try to fund some lights on the practice field, and I have approached our colleagues on the city side and working with Danny Schlitt in Parks and Recreation to see if there is some sort of joint way that we may be able to share the cost of lighting those fields, because in the long term, I think that also will be helpful to the city. So anyway, we continue to work through our designs and look forward to coming out with something in November that's really going to be exciting, that will make all of you proud, and I look forward to breaking ground.
Thank you. I mean, are there any questions about the update on the high school project? If not, we will move on to the next topic, which will be second readings for an adoption of policies. So I'll turn over to Ms. Menson.
Good evening. We have 7 policies for second reading tonight. These are the ones that were presented for first reading September 11th. 4 of the policies relate to the anti-harassment and discrimination, and 3 of the policies are under policy, section A, school board policies. Looking at starting with the anti-harassment policies, JFHA, as with other times we've presented for second reading, any changes between first and second reading have been in red font. There were the discussion of JFHA last board meeting was about 45 minutes, and there were a number of changes in that policy that were incorporated in 3 other anti-harassment policies. The main changes to this policy, JFHA GBA, are defining a protected class that is not done in other policies, but defining as a protected class all those classes that the board had wanted to include, making sure that it was clear that in writing, an individual would be informed of their right to maintain anonymity if they wanted to. Also changing the name, the report of harassment form that had been attached to some of the policies is now attached to all of the anti-harassment policies, and that name has been changed to complaint of harassment. So that has been made as a proper reference in each of the policies. And also making clear that if any individual is contemplating anonymity, they realize it's pointed out to them again that each policy has a section prohibiting retaliation. Are there any questions about the anti-discrimination policies in general, or I guess we'll start more specifically with JFHA GBA. I realize this is a big lift and appreciate all the time that went into to looking at it the last time and then going through to get any feedback in the interim. So JFHA GBA is a prohibition against harassment and retaliation generally. Any questions?
Any questions from any board members?
The form that accompanies this, JFHA GBA, does have a change in the title to complaint of harassment. One question I had for this and the other 4 forms, we had added at the bottom that retaliation is prohibited as outlined in the policy. That's in red because typically when I bring a change to the board, I want to put that in red to alert it to your attention. I'm wondering whether you all want that to stay red in the actual form in the policy, so anyone filling out this form will have that drawn to their attention as well. Thoughts on that?
Any feedback? I think it would be fine to do that, but
Seeing general nodding, okay. So for this policy or this form and others, I'll make sure that that stays red. Everything else that is red in the other policies will be added to black and changed and incorporated. So the next policy.
Sorry, I think that's fine. I wouldn't make that necessarily, the form's got to be red because if people photocopy it, it's going to be black. So
Fair point. When it's up on our website, though, where people will be able to fill it out, and we'll make sure we have a form for that. I do think it makes sense to, if the board's so inclined, to have that be something that's highlighted in some way, whether it's font color. Okay. Policy GB, equal employment opportunity, non-discrimination. Oh, yes.
Mr. Anderson?
Thanks, Vincent. I realize I do have one question on this policy, which is page 8 on lines 23 to 25.
Okay.
It's talking about the informal procedure, and if the complainant and the person accused of harassment agree, the student's principal or principal's designee may arrange for. So it sounds like this is applying in a case where it's student involved, but the policy also covers school personnel. Is there an equivalent informal procedure that we should have for school personnel that isn't and not students? Or maybe I'm reading it wrong, and so that's why I want to check.
No, I appreciate the question. Let me look back to see this falls under. I think that under, let's see, policy statement. I think that this could also apply to, if there were complaints, between staff, and that language does not reflect that, so give me one. I think while 23 through 25 does specifically apply to students, if you were talking about staff members, for example, 27 through 30 would allow the complainant and the person accused of harassment to agree to resolve the complaint informally. Although line 30 then talks about the principal or principal's designee notifying the complainant and the person accused when it's been resolved. So I think that language would cover it if it were complaints by employees. But lines 23 through 25 do specifically refer to students and the involvement of the principal and principal's designee, whereas that would be HR or the Title IX compliance officer if it were between employees. So I'm not sure the best way to proceed or if that would resolve it in your mind, since there are the two paragraphs, one that could cover students and then one that would cover both students and employees, the lines 27 through 30.
Right, so in essence, the policy as written covers the case of either the complainant or the accused not being a student by virtue of the rest of the policy, but if
Right.
it were, this 23 to 25 covers that particular case, just a little bit of extra precision is sort of.
I think so.
Okay,
Yeah.
then I'm fine with that, thanks.
Okay. Anything else on JFHA, GBA? And then jumping to GB, Equal Employment Opportunity Non-Discrimination. In addition to the changes that the board suggested that were made universally to the anti-discrimination policies, the good point was made last time on page 3 at lines 11 through 14 that we don't have a standing committee to determine action, so that language has been changed to say in the event there's a alleged violation by the superintendent, an ad hoc committee shall be appointed by the board at its next scheduled meeting. The VSBA model policy had it written as 2 alternates, but since we don't use the one, we change it that way. Any
Questions?
Okay, corresponding Form GB, other than changing report to complaint in the title, there were no changes to that. If there are no questions, policy JB, Equal Educational Opportunities Non-Discrimination. The changes that were discussed at the last meeting and applied to the first policy from this evening are the same throughout. And there were very few changes to this policy from first reading, but those are all in red.
Questions, anyone?
And then corresponding Form JB. Yes.
Just a general note that when these things go to final and in the table of contents, that we want to change report of the complaint in the title of the document as opposed to just the headline of the document itself.
Oh, yes, thank you. So in the title, when you're looking at the electronic version?
Right, so, right here it says, GB or JBF, report of discrimination. Like the other places, it
Yep.
says report of discrimination instead of complaint.
Yes.
So we'd want to change the file title along with the head of the document.
Thank you for catching that, because that makes sure that we're compliant with web accessibility. So if somebody is viewing the policy through a screen reader, for example, will have the right title. I did catch that in the cross-references, the cross-references didn't have the right name of the form, but thank you for catching that. I will make sure that I incorporate that into the Word document.
Any other questions, comments?
Okay, next is JBA, that's section 504, non-discrimination policy and grievance procedures. The language that's in green and stricken through will change to black. I wanted to just indicate where different policies were, or where different paragraphs were moving in order, and this was the order that we had discussed during first reading. But other than a few commas and semicolons and changing the ordering of things so that it followed what the timeline and the procedure would look like, there were not very many changes to JBA. Are there any questions to policy JBA? or to form JBA.
Questions, comments?
Okay,
Moving on.
the next policy is policy AA, school division legal status. There were very minor changes, from first reading, just capitalization of 2 words and adding the before Falls Church City School Board. Any questions about this policy? Speeding through them, policy AC, non-discrimination. There were no changes to this policy, from first to second reading. Any questions? And last one, policy AD. This policy, there were some substantial changes. Initially, there were 2 policies, AD, which was a model policy called Educational Philosophy, and AE, School Division Goals and Objectives. And there was some very healthy discussion of whether there was a need to follow the VSBA model policy here, where it doesn't really reflect our division, the commitment to IB, the good work that's been done on the mission and on the placemat. So we were tasked with incorporating the placemat and the mission statement that has been vetted through you all and through school staff members, and have the vision of Falls Church City School Board reflect that work. So working with Dr. Noonan, we've put together a combination of those 2 policies into one policy, AD, now it would be called Educational Mission, and it has both the mission statement of Falls Church City Public Schools, the vision and values of the school board, and what action steps it will take based on those visions and values, and then does incorporate the standards of quality as required under the Virginia Code, that the school board accepts the goals of public education, reports compliance in accordance with the standards of quality, and commits itself to providing programs as provided based on funding by the General Assembly. So that's changes from last time, but also we spent a lot of time rewatching the minutes of the board meeting to see what it was that you all wanted and tried to incorporate that. So do you have questions about this, this quite thoroughly revised policy? I know it's very different than what was in front of you last time.
Are there any questions or comments from the board?
Mind-numbingly dull.
Thanks.
No, I think the last version was mind-numbingly something.
Yeah, it was mind-numbingly vague.
That's what it was.
Yes.
This is much better.
This is not mind-numbingly vague. Oh, good, okay.
Yes, Dr.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
Do we want to be the premier international baccalaureate school division in the country, or do we want to be the premier school division in the country and gets there through IB? Because I know there are, 8 of it, we've talked about how, I just put that out there. I think we should be working to promote IB as well as, being good, so just, I'm not dying on that hill, but I put that out for your consideration.
Yeah, it's an interesting question in the context of my draft goals too.
You got to take over the world.
I think for now, this is what we've been talking about.
No, I
so,
know, I know.
Yeah.
Are there any additional comments? If not, I will entertain a motion, please.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the school board approve second reading and adoption of policies JFHA, GBA, prohibition against harassment and retaliation, and corresponding form JFHA, GBAF, prohibition against harassment and retaliation, GB, equal employment opportunity non-discrimination, and corresponding form GBF, report of discrimination. Strike that, complaint of discrimination. JB, equal education opportunities non-discrimination, and corresponding form JBF, complaint of discrimination. JBA, section 504, non-discrimination policy and grievance procedures, and corresponding form JBAF, section 504, non-discrimination policy and grievance procedures. AA, school division legal status. AC, non-discrimination. and AD educational mission.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ranger. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Litton. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you all very much. We will move on to first readings of policies. So continue on, Ms. Menson.
Great. Only 4 policies for first reading this session. The first is policy IEB. It's a national motto. It's actually not a policy that we had previously had, but it is in the Virginia acts as something that we should have a policy on. We have checked with all the principals. This is posted in all of the schools. I notice now that I'm looking at this that one of the quotation marks is facing the wrong way, so I will make that change. But are there any questions about this policy or this proposed policy?
Any questions? Ranger, you look like you really got one burning over there.
I will refrain from making a First Amendment comment.
Thank God we trust in that. That's why they're
You'll have 2 other opportunities before the night is out.
double, single, and the single, double.
If there are no questions, we'll continue on. Ms. Menson?
Yes, policy IE, moments of silence. This is, would replace our policy 610. We actually, in working through this with Dr. Noonan and his leadership team, have made some changes to the model policy. Both the Virginia Code and the model policy say that students need to remain seated and silent. And there's some good, healthy discussion of whether seated is reasonable in light of students maybe taking a knee or having a back brace and needing to stand or having other issues. So we had proposed taking out seated, but do require that students are respectful and silent and not disrupt their peers.
Frankly, functionally, when the day is getting started and we're having the moment of silence, oftentimes kids are still coming into the building. So to have them like seated on the floor doesn't make sense.
The policy as it currently stands, policy 610, is a very open one sentence saying we adopt the procedures and accompanying regulations. And then the regulation 6.10 is much, much longer. It's, I guess for lack of a better word, a little bit apologetic, saying this is required by the code, so we're going to go ahead and adopt this policy, and here's what it looks like. So in many ways, our policy and regulation that are in existence now are much more lengthy than the model policy, IE, and I did get some feedback on that policy from Mr. Anderson. I don't know if that was something you wanted to raise.
Mr. Anderson?
Yeah, thanks, Ms. Minson. I guess my question for colleagues on the board is that my impression from the former policy 610 is it more or less says we're adopting this policy because it's required by statute, to have this mandate, but it doesn't really weigh in on anything beyond that. The draft policy that's here seems to sort of go much more towards endorsing the idea that a moment of silence really does prepare people. And so we're adopting it not because it's a mandate that has been imposed by code, but because we think it's a good idea. And I don't know if that's something that we think. So to put that out there as a question, do we have evidence to back our recognition in policy that this does this? I'll put that out there for feedback.
Feedback, anyone? Ms. Russell.
I would support Mr. Anderson that I think the first paragraph is a bit awkward. I'm not a big fan of the way it's worded, so I think this would be one that I'd want to have reworked a little bit. And what Mr. Anderson said, so in the same way that I'm not sure if personally I, as a school board member, recognize that a moment of silence before each school day is preparing our students, so.
Thank you. Mr. Castillo, did you have a?
I was just gonna ask what the other policy looks like, but now I realize I can look it up, so that's what I'm doing now.
Any other comments or thoughts on that from
Just
Mr. Reisinger?
what exactly does the law require?
That's a great question. One moment. You have 22.1. Thank you. 203. 22.1, 203 requires that in order for every pupil to exercise their right to free, in order for every pupil the free exercise of religion to be guaranteed within schools, the school board of each school division shall establish a daily observance of 1 minute of silence in each classroom of the division. During such 1 minute period of silence, the teacher responsible for the classroom shall take care that all pupils remain seated and silent, make no distracting display to the end that each pupil may, in the exercise of his or her individual choice, meditate, pray, or engage in other silent activity which does not interfere with, distract, or impede other pupils in the like exercise of individual choice, and that the Office of the Attorney General shall intervene and provide legal defense of this law. That was last changed by the General Assembly in 2000, and what our current regulation, thank you, 610 does is it further provides guidance to teachers of what their response should be if a student asks questions about that. So looking at regulation 610, it says, if a student asks, the teacher should advise a student that if the student desires to have silent prayer, he or she may do so, and students and employees are prohibited from praying aloud during a minute of silence. They also cannot otherwise speak, sing, or do something in unison. It also says that teachers and administrators cannot allow or tolerate any coercion or overbearing of a student or students to force others to engage in or refrain in a form of prayer or other permitted activity, that the minute of silence is not conducted as a religious service or exercise, that visitors and employees shall take care that no distractions occur during the minute of silence. So that gives a little bit more structure around how a teacher should respond or what that should look like. As far as ensuring that no students are required to do anything or prevented from doing anything as long as it doesn't interfere with their peers.
So I guess I would associate myself with Mr. Anderson and Ms. Russell's comments and suggest we do something like strike lines 5 and 6 and simply begin line 7 with as required by law, comma, instead of therefore.
So that's 3. Is there broad consensus for that?
There's a hand nod.
Okay.
All right. Were there any questions about the other changes that we had proposed at lines 10 or 11, or are folks okay with the taking out the seated part and making sure? Okay. Any other questions about policy IE, moment of silence? Okay. Policy IEA, Pledge of Allegiance. We also took some liberties with this policy, changing his consistently throughout to they, their, and their child when it refers to students and parents. We also took away the quietly stand or sit at their desk, recognizing that sometimes during the pledge, students are just getting to school late, either off of a bus or going between activities. So are requesting that students remain still and quiet, but they won't necessarily be by desks, depending upon where they are in the building. This is similar, the daily recitation of the pledge is similar to our previous policy, or the current policy right now, 6.9. That policy also talks about flags, and has a requirement in our policies is this now that every classroom will have an American flag that's on display, and that every student is instructed in the history of the flag and the principles for which it stands, specifically the Bill of Rights. That's not part of the VSBA model policies. I believe Kristen confirmed with Sevi that we do have U.S. flags, and we think also Virginia flags in every classroom. I don't necessarily think that it needs to be part of a policy, since it's not part of a Virginia code section that requires it to be included. And the Virginia Code does require that all students at a specific, at least one grade level, do learn about the flag. But our policy as it stands now, 6.9, does require that all students every year be instructed in it, which I don't know is actually happening in every single classroom across the division throughout the year. So I think it would be fine to remove the flag section that was in our policy and moving towards adoption of the VSBA model policies.
And we have US flags, but we don't believe that we have state flags in every classroom.
Okay, thanks. Any questions about IEA Pledge of Allegiance?
Questions? Mr. Reiniger?
Same question as last time. What does the law require?
The law requires that students are required to learn the Pledge of Allegiance and demonstrate such knowledge at 22.1202. And it requires that the Board of Education adopts guidance on the Pledge of Allegiance in school. And actually, I did not pull up the Board of Ed's requirements on that, but I do believe that, let's see, it's 4.4. I think the reference at the bottom of policy IEA, yeah, it's not the Virginia Code that requires it. It's the United States Code at Title IV, Chapter 1, Section 4, that outlines the Pledge of Allegiance, and I guess it just states what the Pledge of Allegiance says. It doesn't require it to be stated every day. Thank you. Yeah. That just, yeah, U.S. Code 4 USC Section 4 just outlines what the pledge actually is. It doesn't require it to be said. And 22.1202 requires instruction on the principles of the flag, at least in one or more grades in every school division, and requires all students to learn the Pledge of Allegiance and to demonstrate such knowledge. Then it talks about the Board of Education's, for the state's guidance on the pledge. So it might be that's where it's coming from. No, there it is. Section C, each school board shall require the daily recitation of the Pledge of Allegiance in each classroom of the school division and shall ensure a flag of the United States is in place in each such classroom. So that is what Virginia Code requires. And what this policy, IEA, does require daily recitation in each classroom. Sorry that took me so long to get there.
Did you have any follow-up, Mr. Reiniger, or?
Well, so the yeah, I guess I find this a little troubling. The part, basically lines 9 and 10 are not required by statute, right?
Section C of Virginia Code 22.1202 does say during such Pledge of Allegiance, students shall, almost the exact language that's included in the policy, during such recitation, students shall stand and recite the pledge while facing the flag with their right hands over their hearts, or an appropriate salute if in uniform. However, no student shall be compelled to recite the pledge if he, his parents, or legal guardian object on religious, philosophical, or other grounds for participating in the exercise, and students who are such exempt shall remain sitting quietly or sitting at their desks while others recite the pledge and make no display that disrupts or distracts others. So it does sound like the model policy follows almost verbatim 22.1202 Section C.
Any other questions or comments?
The last policy for first reading this evening is policy JHH, suicide prevention. We had a chance, I worked with Ms. Sharp, worked with the school psychologist on looking at our current policy 9.61 and corresponding regulation, and tried to see how is it that we handle suicide prevention now to make sure that as we're moving from one policy to another one, we have the steps in place to fully support all of our students. And the sections that are added in red about conducting an assessment, that was a section that the team that looked at this did suggest adding. We did, I tried to show in green where on page 2, the section about the duty to keep students safe and secure, instead of being at the end of the policy, is at the beginning, because that's the ultimate goal of all staff. And in working, speaking with Rebecca, this does reflect what we do now. There is part of our regulation right now, does also outline what non-licensed school staff should do. And I do anticipate that at the time if the board does go through with first reading tonight and second reading adoption at the meeting in November, there will likely be a corresponding regulation that Ms. Sharp will work on with Dr. Noonan that would outline what non-licensed school staff would do in the event of that the non-licensed staff member believes a student is at risk of suicide. You will did want to point out that the language "imminent risk of suicide" is what's consistently in this case, the Board of Ed's suicide prevention guidelines, but our social workers and psychologists wanted to take out imminent risk of suicide, because it's often not until you do a risk assessment that you can determine, is this risk imminent? Does the student have a plan and a method of carrying out that plan? So other than that change, it does hew closely to the VSBA model policies. Are there questions about this policy JHH?
Any questions or comments? If not, thank you any other additional comments? All right. I then will entertain a motion for first reading of these policies.
Mr. Chair, I move that the school board approve first reading of policies IEB, National Motto, IE, Moment of Silence, JHH, Suicide Prevention, and IEA, Pledge of Allegiance, as presented, with the modifications we talked about on the Moment of Silence.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Anderson. There a second? Thank you, Ms. Litton. All those in favor of moving these policies on first read with the additions that were discussed, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you very much. All right, move on to future agenda items. And are there any board members that have any potential items that they would like to bring up? Mr. Reininger?
Just one quick note. At the recent LEAP meeting, Dr. Bethany Latique gave a presentation to the LEAP Advisory Committee on the work that had gone into developing the Family Resource Center with her and some graduate students. And I thought it was a very valuable presentation on the Family Resource Center and moving forward. And I'd suggest that it be given to the board at a future and appropriate meeting, because I think it would be helpful to the board.
Thank you, Mr. Reininger. Any comment? I would think that would be a very good something for us to do. So if you all would work to define an appropriate time and opportunity, I guess probably at a work session would be the best time to have that presentation.
I'll see if I can track her down. Thanks. Yeah, definitely.
Are there any other future agenda items? All right, if not, we will move on to report from the superintendent.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think you're going to mention this as well, but September 15th to October 15th marks National Hispanic Heritage Month. And I just wanted to recognize that, and in the context of our Family Resource Center and the fact that we are digging into closing gaps, I think it's a really important moment to remember the growing population of Hispanic students in the community right now is something that we need to pay close attention to and provide extra time and support for learning, which is part of the goal structure that you saw tonight. This Friday, I'll be attending the University of Virginia's K-12 State Advisory Committee. I've been on this committee for about 6 years. It is chaired by Dr. Bob Pianta, who's the Dean of the College of Education Curry School down at the University of Virginia, along with former City of Falls Church Superintendent Stuart Roberson is his co-chair. And in that meeting, we addressed multiple issues across the state of import. Last year in particular, our focus was on the national teacher shortage and specifically what that meant for us here in Virginia. And I think that advisory committee in some ways had some significant influence over the post-secondary education and looking at how they provide teacher credentialing for four-year degrees to make it easier for folks to become teachers. So anyway, I'll be down at the University of Virginia at this K-12 advisory committee this Friday. Next week, just as a reminder, is the budget finance meeting. And at that meeting next week, and that is on Friday the 19th. I'm sorry, this Thursday, excuse me. This Thursday, the 11th, I knew that, we'll be discussing revenue sharing. So if you're interested in coming, that will be at that's 8 o'clock at Washington, North Washington, where the general government meets. And then again, that's this Thursday. Also this Thursday, I will have the great privilege of going around with the Ed Foundation, where we will be part of the prize patrol, and Lisa High will be with us. And this year they will be awarding over $58,000 in super grants to our teachers throughout the city, and we're very excited to be part of that. Last night I had a chance to sit with the foundation as they were going through each of the grants, and some of the creativity and thoughtfulness of our staff here in the community is just absolutely amazing. So really excited to be part of that. And then this Saturday is the Fall Carnival at Thomas Jefferson. So hopefully I'll see you there. I'll be there will be no dunk tank this year, so you can't look for me there. But anyway, it should be a lot of fun. So if you're looking for something to do this Saturday, come on out to the TJ Carnival. And the last is on October 21st through the 23rd, starting on a Sunday. Right after the Sunday series on the 21st, I'll be heading to the Virginia Association of School Superintendents conference. Again, down in Charlottesville on Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, and be back Tuesday afternoon. So looking forward to, again, networking with my colleagues and hearing about some of the great things that are happening around the state. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next up will be board and student liaison comments. Start down at the end with Ms. Gill.
The Health and Wellness Committee is having a speaker about resilience, and resilience for everything. But it's going to be long meetings, but it should be great. It's going to be in the MEH library, and if there's enough people, we'll move to the cafeteria. But the committee's worked really hard to go out and find someone who they think can really speak to parents and their concerns. The Chamber of Commerce is going to have a live local, shop local. You can also get this cool thing to put on the back of your phone to keep your stuff in it as you shop locally around town.
The Special Education Committee had their first meeting last week, and we mostly planned for the year ahead. They talked about some of the things they were interested in. They continue to be interested in the sign language issue, so we will continue to hear about that in the year ahead. Another area they're interested in exploring a little bit is sort of CTE, kind of the career and technical, what we have available, because they'd heard there were some new classes coming online. So that's an area I think we'll be taking a look at.
Mr. Castillo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Met yesterday with the Daycare Advisory Board. Enrollment in the daycare programs is going strong. There's a lot of interest in the opening of Mount Daniel, a lot of excitement about the possibilities that will come with that. Last week was at the Parks and Rec Advisory Committee, doing a lot of work on finding things that are of value from the existing high school to save for the coming new high school. A lot of work on Big Chimneys Park, trying to get that funded and rationalized, and that's it for me.
Ms. Russell?
So Peter took most of my report with regard to the Education Foundation, so thanks for that, Peter.
Sorry about that.
But it was a really good meeting last night with the Education Foundation, and they have a lot of great things going on. They have a lot of great ideas. So as Peter mentioned, they have the super grants coming up on Thursday for the prize patrol, but a lot of other things in the mix that they're looking at too. And then their, I guess, fundraiser for the Family Assistance Fund is coming up in November, and that's the No Holidays for Hunger, and this is the pie sale. So be looking for that in the near future.
Mad scramble for the bathroom key.
Thank you. Mr. Anderson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I actually missed last month's meeting of the band boosters because it was scheduled the same night as our joint dinner with the City Council. So I will switch a little gear there and say thank you again to Dr. Noonan and your team, and to the city manager and his team for putting together what I thought was a really good time for us to come together as the two bodies. And the Gifted and Talented Advisory Committee hasn't met yet. We'll be coming up in November, and the next Band Boosters meeting, I'll be there for that one. So stay tuned.
Mr. Reitinger?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. In the last few weeks, I've attended both the first meeting of the LEAP Advisory Committee and the first meeting of the Support Employees Advisory Committee. The LEAP Advisory Committee met and had a potluck for the first time, so we had a chance to socialize and chat. The meeting included a number of different topics, among which was a detailed dive on the Family Resource Center, and talking about the goals of that and what the plans are. There was also some discussion about the results that were provided to this board at our last meeting in terms of achievement, and the notion that while for the most part our English language learners are performing well above their, with one exception, the statewide performance for LEAP and ELL students, while the overall population of the city schools is staying fairly constant, the number of LEAP students is going up, and a concern that we keep up to date. And I recommended specifically that if they had input on the amount of resourcing that should be required, that they look at the, what is it called? The planning factors. And so we may be hearing something from them on the planning factors. At the Support Employees Advisory Committee, it was also a good discussion. I will say one of the topics that has been raised in the past and will be raised again is the concern about the number of hours that are assigned to support employees and whether they're sufficient, particularly at the elementary school level. And so that remains a subject of concern for them, and one that I know relates to the time study that the central office is taking on this year.
Thank you very much, Mr. Reitinger. For attending several of the community meetings in regard to the high school project and getting that information and feedback. I think our staff has been doing a great job. Dr. Noonan in particular, I know whenever I'm calling central office looking for him, I don't call him directly anymore. I call Marty first just to ask, is he available? And typical response is he's in a meeting with. But I really appreciate all the hard work that everyone's doing in that. And in particular, when it comes to what now has become the hotbutton issue between with the fly-off, which I've learned a whole heck of a lot more about that system than I probably ever thought I would know. And that's having gone to a school that has a pretty good theater program. It's just, as I've been telling folks, it's just going to be the give and take and trying to explain to them where we are. because I do agree that we are not losing anything within this. I understand the pushback or wanting to have that, but I think the trade-offs with that is pretty, does disappoint me that it's now becoming the athletics versus the arts fight in town. And I think both areas are very important pieces to any school system. However, it does come down to, we have a finite amount of money that was approved by the voters last fall, and we have to stay within that. So I do think we are doing our best to hear from all sides and do what we can for both sides. However, there will be trade-offs within that for both sides, and I think we just have to continue to let folks know that. One of the things I think if at all possible, on one of the next meetings that we have, I know that we are working with someone from a consultant that's on board with regard to the arts with some Kennedys, and if that person is, if available, discussing what things are being done in the theater world that does not include having that type of system in place. And I'm just looking at ways to potentially combat we're losing something within our theater programs and the competitiveness with CAPI Awards, which was mentioned tonight, that we can still be just as competitive within our theater program if we potentially go more in the way of technological and other ways of doing those type of things without having the fly off. Because I do, as Dr. Noonan has alluded to, with the school association, well, not school association, but the VDOE, and with our insurance providers kind of strongly advising against those, I tend to lean that way as well, with those two very important organizations kind of weighing in on that. And that a lot of our neighbors are also starting of what they're building will not include that type of system as well. So, but that's more out there food for thought than anything. But I think we all are trying to do our part as board members to educate factually versus kind of a lot of what I think is hearsay within the community of what's going to be in the building. So as long as we continue to do that and hopefully continue to educate folks with these different meetings that we've been having since day one, I think we'll hopefully get to a middle ground, because I will say that we will not please everyone on both sides, but as long as we get somewhere in the middle, I think we'll be okay with what we're looking to build, because at the end of the day, what we're going to get is a much better facility than what we currently have right now. All right. Any other comment before moving on to approving these minutes? Thank you, Ms. Goodell. All right. So I will ask for approval of minutes for June 13th, 2017, June 27th, 2017, September 11th, 2018, and September 18th, 2018. All right, without objection, so ordered. There is material for the board to read with regard to enrollment numbers. Are there any comments or anything about that? Okay. And with that, if there is no additional comments, we stand adjourned.